Hey guys, tonight we set sail, not on a mighty warship or luxury cruise, but on a breezy, moonlit journey to a speck of land so tiny you might miss it if you blink during a flight. The kind of island that, at first glance, seems better suited for postcards than history books. But this place? It's about to mess with everything you thought you knew about world power, empire building, and the domino effects of geography. Now, fair warning. If you're the type who likes to stay out of trouble, you probably won't survive this. This island? It's been invaded, coveted, rebuilt, and rebranded more times than a bad boy band. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink, and there it is. A lone island jutting out from a shimmering blue sea, sun-scorched and wind-battered, shaped like a crooked molar. Birds circle lazily overhead. Waves slap the cliffs with practiced rhythm. And somewhere inland, wild thyme perfumes the air. You're standing on a rocky shoreline that looks like it hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Because, spoiler, it hasn't changed much. And yet, this seemingly static patch of Earth has sent shockwaves through global history, time and again. You take in your surroundings. It's not big, about the size of a large city park. You could jog from one end to the other before your podcast ends. And yet, thanks to its position, smack in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, this island is like the latch on a very important door. A natural crossroads between Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. If Earth had a naval version of Grand Central Station, you're standing on it. Trade routes zigzag across the waters around you like spaghetti. Whoever controls this island doesn't just own a chunk of rock, they own access to empires, to trade, to ideas, and, unfortunately, to war. As early as 7000 BCE, seafarers and reed boats found their way here, likely by accident. Imagine being that first ancient mariner, bleary-eyed from salt spray, spotting this land on the horizon and thinking, hey, that's not bad. No giant snakes. Let's stay. They bring goats, barley, obsidian tools, and probably a few family feuds. Soon, this rocky dust sprouts fire pits, stone huts, and whispered stories by the moonlight. Historians still argue whether these earliest settlers came directly from Sicily, North Africa, or the Levant. What's not debated? These folks were gutsy. They cultivated the land, carved temples, and built mysterious megaliths older than the pyramids. Yes, older than the pyramids. Not that anyone gives them credit for it at trivia night. You walk past one of these temples. Massive limestone slabs arranged in rings and corridors, aligned with the solstice sun. Archaeologists still debate what rituals took place here. Human sacrifice? Stargazing? The stones aren't talking, but their existence suggests that from the very beginning, this island wasn't just a pit stop, it was sacred ground. As you wander inland, you notice how little space there actually is. The terrain rises sharply, giving way to terraced hills, winding footpaths, and hidden caves. It's the kind of place that breeds resourcefulness because it has to. The soil is stingy, water's precious, and wood? Forget it. You make do with what's around. Which means that over time, islanders get very, very good at importing everything from timber to talent. By 2500 BCE, the island is humming with activity. Bronze tools clink in the sun. Imported obsidian flashes in merchant satchels, and local potters are turning out designs that somehow end up in far-flung corners of the Mediterranean. You even hear a rumor of an early dentist who used beeswax as a filling, which we'll call innovative. But with trade comes attention. And attention? That's a mixed bag. Bronze Age traders from Mycenae, Phoenician sailors looking to expand their nautical empire, all of them stop here. Some for friendly barter, others for less polite reasons. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the island becomes a full-blown trade hub. Ships from Egypt, Carthage, and even early Greek city-states anchor in its harbors. They bring wine scrolls, glass beads, and news of wars brewing elsewhere. You hear whispers of a giant wooden horse that tricked an entire city. You're not sure whether to believe it. And here's the funny thing about being a strategic stopover. You're always in demand, but rarely in charge. Like that cool kid in high school who throws the best parties, but somehow never gets invited to prom. The island grows rich in connections, cultures, and conflicts. But its autonomy? That's always up for grabs. By now, the island's seen waves of settlers. Phoenicians build fortified cities. Greeks sprinkle in myths and marble columns. Carthaginians leave behind warehouses full of olive oil and questionable politics. Everyone leaves something. Even the Romans, who'll soon barge in with their sandals and spreadsheets, are keeping an eye on it. And yet, even amid this cultural, morning comes fast on this little island. The sun doesn't just rise. It erupts from the horizon, flooding every stone, path, and sleepy goat with golden light. You rub your eyes and head inland, where the hum of a new era is buzzing through the air. Bronze is out, iron is in, and you're about to witness the moment this island steps out of prehistory and onto the world stage. It starts, as it often does, with a boat, or several. Slick, swift vessels glide into natural harbors, painted in bright colors and etched with symbols of foreign gods. These are the Phoenicians, traders, colonizers, and probably the inventors of that weird seafood and date combo nobody asked for. They come not to conquer, at least not initially, but to build ports, storage rooms, temples. They bring with them alphabets, purple dye, and a flair for networking that LinkedIn would envy. You stroll through one of their settlements, marveling at the rectangular buildings and orderly streets. The Phoenicians may not have had democracy, but boy, did they have zoning laws. Local islanders adopt their scripts, their gods, their spicy fish recipes. And once again, the island absorbs a new culture without losing its own strange flavor. It's not assimilation, it's improvisation. But here's the thing about being at the center of everything. It paints a big red target on your back. As the Phoenicians thrive, a new superpower peaks over the horizon: Carthage. Think of Carthage as the Phoenicians' overachieving younger cousin. Wealthier, louder, and really into elephants. You blink, and suddenly the island is a key Carthaginian outpost, complete with military installations and harbor defenses. You're drafted, sort of, into this new order. Carthaginian generals inspect troops with stern eyes. Merchants tally up ledgers in 3 languages, and rumors of Roman hostility creep through the markets like a draft under the door. And then it happens. War. The First Punic War, to be precise. Rome and Carthage lock horns over Sicily, and this island, predictably, becomes the battlefield no one can afford to lose. You watch from the cliffs as ships burn in the harbor and soldiers stagger ashore, exhausted and angry. Historians still argue whether the island chose a side or was simply steamrolled by larger forces. But the result is the same. Rome wins. Rome always wins. Soon, Roman legions are marching down your favorite goat path, measuring distances in miles, and introducing Latin like it's going out of style. You adapt again. The Romans pave roads, build aqueducts, and erect temples to gods with suspiciously similar names to the last batch. Suddenly, you're wearing togas, quoting Virgil, and attending debates in the Forum, where one particularly grumpy senator keeps insisting that Carthage must be destroyed. Spoiler, it will be. One mainstream historical fact: after the First Punic War, this island officially becomes part of the Roman Republic, and remains so for centuries. It's considered a key naval base, a breadbasket, and a proving ground for ambitious governors. A fringe tidbit: some say Julius Caesar once visited the island during his early military service, and left behind a local lover and a child no historian can verify. Romantic? Maybe. Convenient fan fiction? Almost definitely. Under Roman rule, the island flourishes. You walk through bustling towns with public baths, theaters, and markets selling everything from North African spices to Spanish olives. Latin becomes the language of law, worship, and casual insults. But underneath the marble and mosaic, something else simmers, a fusion of identities. Local traditions persist. Temples to native gods remain. Islanders write Latin with a strange, rhythmic twist, something that will echo in their language for centuries to come. As you wander into the countryside, you see vast agricultural estates worked by enslaved laborers and free farmers alike. Olive oil flows like wine, and wine flows like, well, also wine. Roman aristocrats vacation here, calling it relaxing, while their slaves mutter in several dialects about the heat and the flies. You pass a small chapel tucked into a cave, an odd sight in pagan Rome. Inside, a flickering oil lamp reveals crude Christian symbols scratched into the stone. Christianity, you realize, is quietly spreading. The Romans are too busy with taxes and gladiator games to notice. For now, as the centuries grind on, the Roman Empire bloats and creaks under its own weight. Barbarians nibble at the edges. Emperors come and go, some great, some utterly useless. Eventually, Rome splits in two, like a bad business partnership. The island finds itself under the eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, and things get complicated. You can still buy wine and sandals. But now the liturgies are in Greek, and the tax collectors are somehow even worse. Pirates start sniffing around again, sensing weakness. The island holds on, stubborn as ever. But you can feel the tide turning. In the meantime, the people of the island continue doing what they've always done: adapting, absorbing, surviving. They pray to Roman saints in old Phoenician temples, speak a language that sounds like Latin with a splash of lemon, and write poems about the sea in scripts half the world has forgotten. You sit on a hillside, looking out at the harbor where triremes once clashed and Carthaginian spies once whispered. Below, a shepherd leads his flock past Roman ruins, now half swallowed. You wake to the distant clang of metal, swords being drawn, armor buckled, shields tested against fists. The island is changing hands again, but this time it's not just political. It's spiritual. The Mediterranean winds carry with them more than trade goods now. They whisper of holy wars, crusades, and revelations. You wipe the dust from your tunic and brace yourself. The medieval world is knocking, and it's knocking with gusto. Out of the east come the Arabs, sharp-witted traders, scholars, and warriors, riding the waves with sails full of ambition. By the mid-9th century, the island, now a weary prize passed between powers, is conquered once more. But this time, it's not all fire and fury. You're surprised by what follows: prosperity, stability, gardens full of citrus and almond trees. New word for old things. Arabic fills the air in bustling marketplaces, mingling with the locals' Latin-based tongue until it forms a rhythmic hybrid language unlike any other. Mosques rise beside crumbling Roman ruins. Public fountains gurgle. Scholars huddle over scrolls of astronomy, medicine, and poetry. One mainstream historical fact: under Arab rule, the island becomes a center of learning and agriculture, famous for introducing irrigation systems still used today. Those prickly pear cacti? Thank the Arabs. That ingenious water wheel? Also them. You chew a sticky sweet fig and listen as a man recites verses from the Quran, his voice echoing through an open courtyard. The architecture is changing too. Pointed arches, shaded courtyards, stone lattices that filter sunlight like lace. And all of it nestled within the same skeleton left behind by Romans and Greeks before them. But don't get too comfortable, because around the year 1091, another ship crests the horizon, sleek, scarred by battle, its sails painted with Christian crosses. The Normans have arrived. You sigh. Another empire, another anthem to memorize. The Normans, descendants of Viking raiders turned Christian kings, storm the island with the sort of gusto only people wearing full chainmail in Mediterranean heat can muster. But here's the twist. You're in history's strangest but most successful group project. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some Norman kings were so fond of their Muslim administrators that they appointed them to high office. One ruler, even had his royal correspondence written in Arabic. Try putting that on a coat of arms. Still, power is never static. Over the centuries, the island is passed like a coin between dynasties: the Swabians, Angevins, Aragonese. You try to keep up with the heraldry, but the flags change faster than your neighbor changes political opinions. Each wave of conquest brings its own flavor. The Swabians love castles, big, brooding ones. You stand on a battlement and gaze out across terrace hillsides where farmers still speak a language that now blends Latin, Arabic, and new Catalan inflections. You hear children rhyme in words that sound familiar, but not quite. The island's dialect is taking shape, not fully Maltese yet, but getting close. A linguistic quilt stitched over centuries of upheaval. Then comes the order. The Knights Hospitaller, to be exact. A crusading order kicked out of Rhodes. Looking for a new HQ, and preferably not too expensive. The island, battered and branded by empires, makes them an offer they can't refuse. In 1530, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V grants the island to the Knights in exchange for 1 falcon per year. No joke. That's your open scholarly debate prompt. And with that, the island enters a whole new chapter. One of fortresses, crusader zeal, and relentless preparation. Because the storm is coming. You feel it in the air, tension thick like honey left too long in the sun. The Ottoman Empire, massive and hungry, sets its sights on the island. It's 1565, and suddenly everyone's whispering about the siege. The Great Siege. You're no soldier, but you help where you can. You carry stones for fortifications, fill water barrels, patch wounds. Cannonballs scream over the walls. Smoke turns the sky orange. The Ottomans outnumber the knights and local defenders by tens of thousands. But the island does not fall. That siege becomes legend, a defining moment. And you survive it. Barely. One mainstream fact. The 1565 Great Siege of Malta is considered one of the most significant military engagements of the 16th century. The Knights. A king quietly adds a few more cannons to his ships. As you emerge from the smoke, your clothes torn and mind buzzing, you realize something. The island is no longer just a convenient stopover. It's a symbol, a stronghold, a stubborn, rock-hard reminder that sometimes the little guy wins. The Knights, flushed with pride and papal backing, go on a building spree. Valletta, the new capital, rises from siege-charred ground, designed by military architects with a flair for drama. Massive bastions, grid streets, palaces and cathedrals that shine like teeth in the sun. You walk its fresh-laid streets in awe, past bakers, jewelers, blacksmiths, and beggars, all of them stitched into a society still reeling from near annihilation. The city is a fortress and a sanctuary, a monument and a rebuke. And beneath it all, always the heartbeat of the island. The language, the people, the stubborn refusal to vanish. As dusk settles, you stand on the walls of Valletta, gazing out over the Grand Harbor. Below, ships arrive from every corner of the globe. Above, the first stars wink into place. The air smells of gunpowder, orange blossom, and something else, resolve. Because this island, this tiny, sun-bleached scrap of land in the middle of the sea, has survived more than most continents. And it's not done yet. Not even close. You blink, and it's the 17th century. Not because you time-traveled, though wouldn't that be convenient, but because this island doesn't stop moving forward. The echoes of the Great Siege are still in the cobbled streets. But now the clamor has shifted. Less cannonballs, more construction. Valletta grows taller, stronger, shinier. You dodge carts, skirt scaffolding, and wonder if anyone on this rock ever takes a break. The Knights of St. John, those sword-swinging, falcon-paying landlords, have now fully settled in. But they're not just warrior monks anymore. They're princes in all but name, hosting operas, funding hospitals, and throwing feasts with more silverware than sense. You sneak into a grand banquet once, don't ask how, and the roast peacocks still haunt your dreams. One mainstream historical fact: the Knights established one of the most advanced medical systems in Europe here. including a hospital so well designed that even modern architects get a bit jealous. But let's talk about contradictions. You walk past that gleaming hospital and into a back alley where a merchant is bribing an official with a basket of saffron. Across the street, a knight in full armor is whispering secrets to a French diplomat. Above you, the cathedral bells toll for a saint whose bones were definitely not smuggled here in a wine barrel. Wink. This island is a paradox machine. Pious knights building Baroque palaces. Holy orders hosting masked balls. You hear prayers in Latin and gossip in Maltese, Italian, French, Arabic, sometimes all in one sentence. The architecture reflects it, too. Islamic tiles inside Gothic chapels with Renaissance paintings under Baroque domes. It's like someone hit shuffle on a history playlist and never looked back. But for all their gold leaf glory, the knights are getting comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. Their military sharpness dulls, and the island becomes more museum than fortress. Still, daily life hums along. You work in a shipyard one season, help at the Aubert's kitchens another. You hear rumors, always rumors, of revolutions and wars abroad. But here, the sea keeps rolling in. The sun keeps shining. You start to think maybe, just maybe, things are settling down. Cue the thunderclap. It's the late 18th century now, and a short man with big ideas is marching across Europe. You guessed it, Napoleon Bonaparte. And surprise, he's got his eye on the island. In 1798, the French arrive with an alarming amount of flair. They demand harbor access, offer peace, and then casually take over. Just like that. 1 minute, you're sipping fig wine under a statue of St. Paul. The next you're watching French troops pull it down and replace it with Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité banners. Napoleon doesn't stay long. He's got Egypt to invade and legacies to carve, but he leaves behind reforms that blow the powdered wigs off the local nobility. Slavery? Abolished. Noble privileges? Gone. Church property? Seized faster than you can say vive la revolution. Here's your quirky tidbit. Legend has it that the French looted so much silver from the churches that they had to use cannon barrels to smuggle it onto their ships. History or dramatic embellishment? Historians still argue whether Napoleon's reforms were true liberation or just conveniently timed pillaging. Now, you'd think the locals might appreciate all this equality business, but oh no. You've never seen an uprising like this one. The islanders, enraged by French disrespect for their religion and traditions, don't just grumble. They revolt, fiercely, passionately, and with British help, no less. That's right, enter the British. By 1800, after a protracted blockade and skirmishes that turned villages into battlegrounds, the French surrender. And just like that, the Union Jack flutters over the fortresses. Another chapter begins, this one in English. The British settle in with typical colonial polish. Red phone boxes. Yeah, naval discipline. But unlike past conquerors, they don't just use the island. They integrate it into the empire. The harbors become essential to British naval strategy, especially as steam replaces sail and the Mediterranean heats up politically. You see dockyards swell with activity, coal silos rise like black obelisks, and Royal Navy uniforms outnumber seagulls. Maltese becomes peppered with English loanwords. You eat pastéis with one hand and read Shakespeare with the other. Still, identity remains a tightrope. The British try to anglicize the locals, language laws, education reforms, but Maltese hearts beat to older rhythms. Churches stay packed. Festivals remain defiantly Mediterranean. And the islanders? They keep smiling, nodding, then doing things their way. You wander past schools where children chant Latin prayers in the morning and recite British poetry in the afternoon. You sit in a chapel next to a British officer, lighting a candle for a saint he can't name. You realize something profound. This island doesn't resist change. It digests it. One day, a British admiral leans over a map and calls the island the unsinkable aircraft carrier. You raise your eyebrows. The phrase sticks, especially as World War II looms like storm clouds over the horizon. But that's for later. For now, you sit at a bustling cafe in Valletta. British soldiers argue about cricket, while local musicians strum folk songs on lutes. The streets ring with a polyglot buzz. And above it all, the limestone buildings glow golden in the late afternoon sun. The nights are long gone. Napoleon came and went. The British are the new custodians. But the soul of the island? The morning hits your face like a slap from a salty breeze. British uniforms scurry past you on the limestone streets of Valletta, crisp and busy, with the kind of urgency only a looming global conflict can inspire. It's the 20th century now, and while other corners of Europe flirt with modernism, jazz, and existential dread, this tiny island is about to become one of the most important and most bombed spots on Earth. You step out onto a balcony and squint at the horizon. War is coming. Again, because of course it is. At first, things feel deceptively calm. You're under the Union Jack, sipping tea, arguing about cricket, and watching steamboats bob in the harbor. The British Empire calls the shots. But there's a fragile balance here. Maltese citizens still celebrate saints with confetti and cannons. British officers still nod politely in church and then write condescending letters home about the locals. It's complicated. But then, in 1939, Hitler flexes and the whole world holds its breath. Here comes your mainstream historical fact. During World War II, Malta became one of the most heavily bombed places on the planet. Between 1940 and 1942, Axis powers dropped more bombs on this small island than on London during the Blitz. Yeah, that much. You barely have time to duck. The first sirens blare across Valletta in June 1940. The Italians strike first. Mussolini's ego can't resist a target this symbolic and strategic. Then the Germans come, and suddenly, your sleepy Mediterranean island becomes a war zone. You help dig shelters. You ration food. You get used to the strange routine of air raids. Run, wait, hope, emerge. Rinse and repeat. The island's ancient honey-colored stone crumbles under wave after wave of bombing. But somehow the people, they hold. They endure. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Locals started painting fake doors and windows on bombed-out buildings to make it look like they were still whole. Fooling no one, but somehow preserving dignity amid the destruction. The siege reaches absurd levels of intensity. Supplies dwindle. Bread is a luxury. You once trade a pair of shoes for a tomato. Children play with shrapnel. And yet, the island refuses to fall. A stubborn middle finger to the Axis, built from rubble and grit. You hear rumors of help. Convoys braving U-boats and enemy air patrols. The most famous is Operation Pedestal in 1942. A fleet of British ships battles its way through the Mediterranean hellscape to bring desperately needed supplies to the island. Only 5 ships make it. One of them, the SS Ohio, limps into Grand Harbor, half sunk, still afloat only because 2 destroyers are literally holding her up. The people weep. The church bells ring. You're not crying, you're crying. That convoy saves the island. Barely. In recognition of Malta's bravery, King George VI awards the entire population the George Cross, the highest civilian honor for valor. Yes, the entire island gets a medal. The George Cross is added to the national flag. It's still there today. But don't mistake survival for serenity. After the war, things get political. The British want to keep the island. Strategically, it makes sense. Militarily, it's gold. But Maltese national sentiment has shifted. After enduring years of war and sacrifice, people are asking, why are we still a colony? A slow-burning movement for independence begins. You attend heated public debates in crowded halls, where locals argue in English, Italian, and Maltese, sometimes within the same sentence. Some want full independence. Others prefer integration with the UK, and a few dream of becoming part of Italy. Yeah, no thanks. One mainstream historical tension. In the 1950s, there's a real, messy debate about whether Malta should become a part of the United Kingdom itself. Historians still argue whether that was ever a serious offer or just colonial-style tactics. Eventually, the people speak. Independence becomes inevitable. It's 1964, and you're there when the British flag is lowered and a new red and white standard rises, proudly bearing the George Cross. There's cheering, singing, and a few ex-soldiers crying quietly into their beers. Malta is free. Well, mostly. The Queen still shows up occasionally. British troops still hang around until 1979, when they finally leave for good. That date is now known as Freedom Day. You celebrate by eating too much rabbit stew and watching fireworks explode over the Grand Harbor, echoing like ghosts of older battles. But independence isn't a magic wand. Suddenly, the island has to fend for itself. Economically, politically, culturally. You walk the streets and see the struggle. Unemployment, immigration, half-built hotels, and hopeful politicians. But there's also music, art, pride. The language, once sidelined, is declared official. Maltese, that spicy stew of Arabic, Italian, English, and God knows what, is now taught in schools and shouted proudly in Parliament. You take a bus right across the island. It's dusty and loud. The radio blasting a mix of Madonna and traditional Anna music. The teenage driver curses in 3 languages, narrowly missing a chicken and 2 goats. You've never felt more at home. Slowly, steadily, Malta begins to reinvent itself. Tourism booms. Cruise ships dock. Digital nomads arrive with laptops and dreams of sea view workstations. The economy shifts. You get a job in a hotel, then a tech startup, then a translation service that mostly just explains swear words to confuse tourists. One quirky new trend: people start restoring centuries-old houses into boutique heirlooms, complete with Wi-Fi, cappuccino machines, and a few night helmets for aesthetic. But make no mistake, the island never forgets. You can't turn a corner without tripping over history. A Baroque church on one side, a Roman temple under your feet, a Cold War radar station on the hill. The past isn't behind you, it's with you. It is you, and through it all, the sea keeps kissing the coast. Relentless, timeless. You realize something strange, maybe even profound. This island, this rock in the middle of the sea, has been many things. A temple site, a battleground, a beacon. You wake to the clatter of espresso cups and the hum of conversations that blend Maltese with just enough English to keep you eavesdropping. It's the 1980s now, and this tiny island is buzzing. Not with warplanes or invaders, but with ambition. A different kind of reconstruction is underway. Independence is no longer a bold experiment. It's a working reality. You can feel it in the sidewalks being relayed in Medina, the new hotels sprouting up along Slima's seafront, and in the way people walk, straighter, surer, as if the weight of centuries is finally shifting off their shoulders. But don't be fooled. The struggle continues, just in subtler ways. Malta is navigating its post-colonial identity like someone trying to drive a stick shift for the first time. There's grinding, there's stalling, but there's also motion. You see it in the political sphere where 2 major parties, the Nationalists and Labour, clash over everything from foreign policy to school syllabi. People argue about neutrality, NATO, even whether your neighbor should be allowed to hang laundry on Sundays. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In 1987, Malta formally declares itself a neutral country, committed to peace and non-alignment. That means no military alliances, no foreign bases, no funny business. But here's a quirky twist. Neutrality doesn't stop the island from getting involved in global drama. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi becomes Malta's oddball BFF for a while. He sends oil. Malta sends back enthusiastic speeches and awkward diplomatic hugs. Historians still argue whether this relationship was savvy geopolitics or a high-stakes game of let's befriend the loudest guy in the room. Meanwhile, you're navigating life in a country that feels half Mediterranean vacation spot, half overachieving student trying to impress the cool kids at the UN. You work a few odd jobs, tour guide by day, DJ by night. Your Maltese techno set still gives people flashbacks. You eat Karen Forn in one sitting and wash it down with a pint of Sisk. You sit at waterfront cafes where journalists debate politics with fishermen, and where the national pastime is trying to guess how many centuries the building next to you has stood. Culturally, the island is blossoming. You attend art shows in repurposed forts, poetry readings in stone courtyards, and theater productions that feature knights rapping in Maltese. There's a strange electricity in the air, a feeling that Malta isn't just surviving anymore. It's starting to dream big. The big dream? Europe. In the 1990s, talk of EU membership grows louder. Some people are thrilled. Finally, a chance to join the grown-ups table. Others worry it means selling out, losing the island's hard-won identity in a sea of regulations and homogenized cheese. Still, the momentum builds. You watch public debates so intense they'd make gladiators flinch. Should we join the Eurozone? What will happen to our neutrality? Will British sausages be banned? The 2003 referendum on EU membership feels like a national therapy session. Turnout is massive. Emotions are high, and when the votes are counted, just over 53% say yes. Barely. You feel the tension crackle as the results are announced. You're in the crowd in Valletta when people cheer, cry, hug, and quietly wonder what they've just committed to. The quirky bit? In true Maltese fashion, the celebrations include fireworks, a marching band, and someone grilling sausages on a World War II-era helmet. The formal accession happens on May 1st, 2004. Malta becomes the EU's smallest member state, but not the quietest. You attend the first European Parliament election, where everyone shows up like it's the Eurovision finals. Turns out, tiny doesn't mean timid. You watch as roads get repaved, regulations multiply, and locals develop passionate opinions about the shape of cucumbers. Fun pour in, projects launch, and suddenly, people are saying Brussels with a mix of awe and exasperation. You joke with your friends, Malta survived the Ottomans, Napoleon, and Hitler. We can survive EU paperwork. But behind the sarcasm, something bigger is happening. Malta isn't just adapting to Europe. It's reshaping what it means to be a European microstate. Take language, for example. English remains strong, but Maltese thrives, used in official documents, street signs, even Eurovision songs. And food? Forget fusion. Malta perfects the art of stubbornly traditional cuisine with just a hint of modern flair. You eat rabbit stew with a side of eco-certified arugula and call it heritage chic. Economically, the island transforms. Tourism is booming. So is gaming, yes, video games. By the late 2000s, Malta becomes a hub for online gambling companies, thanks to favorable tax laws and a population that can translate customer service complaints in 3 languages. You never thought tiny Limestone Island would be the epicenter of digital blackjack, but here we are, and politically, Malta finds its voice. On issues like migration, climate change, and digital regulation, the country punches far above its weight. You sit in on EU summits where Maltese diplomats argue passionately, if a bit loudly, for small state rights. People listen. Maybe it's the history. Maybe it's the volume. Still, not everything is sunny. With rapid growth comes pressure. Infrastructure strains. Traffic explodes. Construction booms, so hard you start to wonder if there's any rock left under the cranes. Locals whisper about overdevelopment. It's every time a new hotel goes up where an olive grove once stood. And then there's the darker side, corruption scandals, political tensions, and the tragic 2017 assassination of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Her murder shocks the world and forces the country into a painful reckoning with transparency, governance, and justice. Historian, you sit cross-legged on a limestone terrace, the golden dusk wrapping Valletta's domes and spires in warm light. Below you, the harbor glimmers like polished armor. The cannons are long silent, but the echoes of centuries still hum beneath the breeze. And now, here in the 21st century, Malta is doing what it has always done, reinventing itself yet again. The island's role is shifting from fortress to forum, from outpost to influencer. It may no longer control ancient sea routes or host naval empires, but it's become something else entirely. A micro-laboratory for global trends. Take climate change. You stroll past tiny electric taxis zipping through medieval streets and solar panels glinting from rooftops older than most countries. Malta, with its limited space and precious resources, doesn't have the luxury of ignoring the problem. Water is scarce. Summers are getting hotter. Tourists are increasing, and with them, the strain. Yet the island is experimenting. Rainwater harvesting makes a comeback, echoing ancient Phoenician techniques. Local farmers plant climate-resilient crops like prickly pear and carob. Yes, the stuff you thought was fake chocolate in the 90s. Meanwhile, politicians debate sustainability while sipping fair trade espresso at EU summits. The big, mainstream historical moment? Malta signs on to the European Green Deal and begins rolling out aggressive environmental goals by the mid-2020s, aiming for carbon neutrality by 2050. But there's a fringe detail that doesn't make headlines. Some locals still use traditional wind cooling courtyards that beat air conditioning for comfort and energy savings. Who needs smart homes when your ancestors engineered stone breezeways to whisper cool the entire household? You spend time with families in Gozo who live almost entirely off the grid. Solar-powered ovens, gray water recycling, gardens fed by seaweed compost. It's a curious mashup of ancient practices and modern urgency, and weirdly, it works. Meanwhile, Malta's political identity continues to evolve. The neutrality clause still stands, but the island has become a diplomatic bridge. You attend a 2023 summit where representatives from the EU, North Africa, and the Middle East gather not in Brussels or Geneva, but in Valletta. It's symbolic, this little rock with a big history of hosting empires now hosts ideas. Migration becomes one of those ideas. Geographically, Malta is both gatekeeper and guardian. You sail on a patrol vessel. Strictly as an observer, don't get dramatic, where officials monitor waters teeming with fragile boats. Some carry hopeful families, others desperate men fleeing wars and poverty. It's complicated. Tensions rise. Debates swell like the sea. Should Malta be obligated to host thousands when it's barely bigger than a major city block? Or is it precisely because of its history, a history steeped in arrivals, sieges, and survival, that it has a unique responsibility? Historians still argue whether Malta's response to migration in the 2020s will be remembered as humanitarian resilience or political pragmatism. You, for now, just try to help at one of the community kitchens in Marsa, where volunteers serve lentil stew to people who have traveled through fire and ocean to get here. And through it all, the culture deepens. Maltese music fuses Arabic makams with indie synths. Teenagers perform Shakespeare in Maltese on TikTok. Folk festivals blend village saints with drone light shows. The country may be ancient, but its youth are anything but stuck in the past. You visit a small VR museum built into a 17th century bastion where you walk through every invasion Malta has ever faced. It's dizzying and a little surreal when a knight offers you a digital cappuccino after explaining siege tactics. But then again, isn't this Malta's magic? The past is never far away, but it's never stuck. It mutates, like coral growing on an old anchor, layering old and new until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. And speaking of the past, you decide to trace it. Literally, you follow a jagged walking route from Burgu to Medina, stopping at every major historical site. What you find isn't just walls and cannons, but subtle symbols. Roman mosaics beside Arab calligraphy, British clocks and Baroque towers, neon bar signs under Phoenician-era balconies. Malta's identity isn't built on purity. It's built on layers, and that's what makes it endure. You remember a Maltese phrase someone told you early on. Min jaf il passat, jifum il present. He who knows the past understands the present. Which brings you to a quirky modern initiative. School children are now learning local history through roleplay. You walk into a primary school and see a 9-year-old dressed as Napoleon trying to negotiate trade terms with a classmate posing as a 16th century corsair. It's chaotic, it's adorable, and it might be the best history class ever invented. Meanwhile, the economy continues to surprise. Beyond tourism and gaming, Malta becomes a quiet tech powerhouse. Blockchain, AI development, And even space research find tiny homes on the island. A Maltese startup launches a satellite in 2029, the size of shoebox, of course, and names it Gasfer, or bird. You look up that night from the cliffs near Dingley and wonder if it's blinking down at you. You wake up to church bells echoing across the Grand Harbor, a sound that could belong to any century. Somewhere behind those warm sandstone walls, the same rhythms continue. Boats being unloaded, prayers whispered, balconies swept. But you've come here today not for history in stone, but for history in blood. Not the bloody kind, don't panic. We're talking DNA. Malta's gene pool, you soon discover, is like a living fossil. Thanks to its central location and long line of visitors, invaders, and settlers, the island holds a kind of biological archive. Scientists in the early 21st century begin using Maltese genetic data to track ancient migration routes across the Mediterranean. And what they find is remarkable. You spend an afternoon with a local archaeogeneticist. Try saying that 3 times fast, who explains that modern Maltese people carry unique genetic markers that trace back not just to southern Europe, but to North Africa, the Middle East, and even the Levant. Basically, Malta is a microcosm of all the wanderers, traders, and conquerors who ever crossed the sea. The mainstream historical fact? A 2021 study confirms that Maltese ancestry includes significant Phoenician and Arab lineage, reshaping public understanding of the island's ancient roots. The quirky tidbit: one researcher finds a genetic marker in a Gozo village that likely came from a single Berber woman who arrived over 1,000 years ago, possibly as a trader, a slave, or even a stowaway. They name the marker Aisha's Echo. A local pub promptly adopts the name and sells a bright green cocktail to match. You hike through inland Malta next, where sleepy farms seem barely touched by time. Fields divided by rubble walls stretch into the horizon. The dry, almost lunar soil looks unforgiving, but somehow citrus trees still grow. You're following ancient footsteps again, this time of Bronze Age settlers who left mysterious stone cart ruts across the island. No one really knows what caused them. Perhaps wooden sleds, alien hovercrafts. Hey, fringe theories count, or something in between. Historians still argue whether these ruts were ceremonial, practical, or both. But either way, you can walk them barefoot and feel strangely connected to people who had no written language, no metal tools, but somehow carved a society from rock. Later, in Dinah, the Silent City, you wander narrow alleys where time blurs. The Arab street grid still holds. The knights' coats of arms still decorate doorways. The scent of baking pastéis mingles with the whiff of incense from a chapel no bigger than your living room. And then, just when you think you've absorbed all the history Malta has to offer, someone invites you to a wedding. Not just any wedding, a traditional Maltese gazela. You're not entirely sure what's going on, but you go with it. There are lace headscarves, zambamba drums, roasted rabbit, and a great aunt who insists on doing the Anna. Traditional folk singing that sound like opera and battle rap had a baby. The blend of pagan, Catholic, and Mediterranean customs stuns you. You learn that Maltese weddings still carry echoes of ancient fertility rites, layered with Roman and Christian elements. The bride wears something blue and something blessed. The groom carries a talisman in his shoe. At one point, a distant cousin tells you the couple should avoid looking into mirrors for 3 days to keep the jinns away. You just nod. Modern Malta, for all its EU credentials and high-tech development, still dances to ancient rhythms beneath the surface. You see it in the way feast days turn entire towns into theater sets. You see it in the stubborn respect for grandmothers, for land, for stories. And you begin to understand that Malta's real power isn't its size or even its history. It's its continuity. This is a place where civilizations don't just pass through, they get absorbed. And in doing so, they change and are changed. Like that time you visit a local school and discover students learning Arabic calligraphy, Latin proverbs, and Maltese poetry, all in the same week. One teacher tells you, we're not one culture, we're the archive of many. And maybe that's why, when the island faces cultural pressures, whether from tourism, modernization, or migration, it tends to adapt instead of break. It mixes. It reinvents. Take the Maltese language itself, a fusion of Sicilian Arabic grammar, with heavy layers of Italian, French, and English vocabulary. It's the only Semitic language written in Latin script. You hear someone shout "Era, chill out Hux," and realize they just mashed Arabic, English, and Maltese in a single sentence. You smile. It's weird. It's beautiful. It's Malta. That night, you sit with a group of teenagers in Slima, asking what the island means to them. One shrugs. Small place, big history. Another chimes in, with a crossroads. The sea brings people. It always has. And the sea, as always, laps at the edge of every conversation here. You walk along the coast, watching little fishing luzza boats bob on the tide. Painted eyes of Osiris still adorn. You're standing in a museum basement. Well, technically it's a catacomb, but let's not freak out about it. The air is cool and still, thick with the scent of dust and time. A flickering screen behind you plays a looped video of ancient trade routes, glowing lines crisscrossing the Mediterranean like a nervous system. And right at the heart of it, Malta. That's where we're going next, deeper into the island's economic history. You've seen the knights and the crusades, the empires and their baggage, but now it's time to follow the money. Because while Malta has seen its fair share of sieges and ceremonies, it's also long been a hub for commerce, cunning, and capitalism, long before that word became synonymous with glass towers and stock tickers. Let's rewind to the 16th century again, right after the Great Siege of 1565. You're wandering through post-battle Valletta as the dust settles. And guess what? The Knights of St. John aren't just fortifying the city, they're turning it into a Mediterranean money magnet. The mainstream historical fact? Valletta becomes one of the first planned cities in Europe, designed not just for defense, but also for trade. Broad streets, fortified harbors, and merchant quarters spring up with dizzying speed. But the real masterstroke? Tax breaks. Yes, even back then. The Knights offer incentives to merchants, bankers, and shipbuilders, essentially making Malta the 16th century version of a duty-free zone. You can almost hear a knight whisper, "Welcome to low-tax paradise." The quirky detail? Maltese ports become so infamous for smugglers and creative accounting that rival traders nickname it the Golden Pebble. One 17th century Neapolitan sailor writes in his diary that Malta is where truth is shipped out and profits roll in. Still, it's not all rogue traders and powdered wigs. Malta also builds a reputation for craftsmanship, especially in textiles, lace, and later, ship repair. You're watching a Maltese woman in the 1800s hand-stitch lace patterns so intricate they look like spider webs laced with moonlight. Queen Victoria herself eventually orders Maltese lace for royal garments. Imagine that, an island with fewer people than a modern football stadium influencing royal fashion. Fast forward again. The British are in charge now, and Malta becomes a key node in a new empire. It's not just about forts anymore. It's about connectivity. Steamships, telegraph cables, coaling stations. By the late 1800s, Malta is basically the Mediterranean version of a truck stop, but way fancier. Sailors refuel here. Merchants exchange letters. Diplomats take tea while waiting on decoded messages from Alexandria. Historians still argue whether Malta's economy during the British era was exploitative dependency or strategic alliance. Did the Brits invest to build Malta up, or just to wring every ounce of usefulness from it? Either way, the legacy is mixed. You walk through old naval yards, now turned into tech hubs and event venues, and feel the tension. Glory and grit, progress and ghosts. And then, independence. 1964. You're on Republic Street, squashed in a crowd of waving flags and nervous optimism. Malta is free, but also financially fragile. The British military leaves a hole in the economy the size of a galleon, and locals scramble to fill it. What follows is one of Malta's most overlooked stories. Its reinvention not through conquest, but through cleverness. You meet a woman who worked in the first textile factories in the 1970s. No aircon, just ceiling fans and a shared radio blaring ABBA. She tells you how Malta went from colonial outpost to manufacturing hub in a matter of years. Electronics, toys, even chewing gum, all made here. Small scale but strategic. Then comes tourism. Lots of it. By the 1990s, the Maltese economy pivots again. Sunny skies and Baroque churches become a package deal. Hotels mushroom. English language schools pop up everywhere. You can't swing a beach towel without hitting a German backpacker or a British retiree. The fringe tidbit. There's a moment in the early 2000s when Malta briefly advertises itself as the Hollywood of the Mediterranean. Gladiator, Troy, even Game of Thrones film here. Locals still argue whether they like the attention or just the catering. And yet, as always, the island doesn't stop evolving. It's evening now, and you're perched on a low wall overlooking Marsaxlokk Bay. Fishermen sort their nets under fading light. And the luzza boats, those cheerful little things painted in primary colors, bob gently like floating confetti. If this were a postcard, it would feel too perfect to be real. But you're here to dig deeper, not just into Malta's economy or battles, but into something trickier, something quieter, but just as powerful, ideas. Specifically, Malta's role in shaping philosophy, science, and cultural identity, not just for itself, but for entire civilizations. Yes, all from a rock you could bike across in an afternoon. Let's rewind. Again, you're now in 60 CE, walking slowly along a pebbled beach as a shipwreck survivor coughs up seawater nearby. His name? Paul of Tarsus. Yes, that Paul. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's ship crashes on Malta during his journey to Rome, and during his 3-month stay, he heals the sick, charms the locals, and essentially sparks the birth of Christianity on the island. The mainstream historical fact? This event places Malta among the earliest Christian communities in the world, and Maltese identity remains deeply entwined with this moment, both spiritually and politically. You pass a statue of Paul now, holding a book and looking only mildly seasick. A local woman sells honey rings nearby and tells you, "He made us holy, and then everyone wanted a piece of us." She's not wrong, but it's not just religion. Malta's tiny footprint somehow keeps ending up in the middle of enormous intellectual shifts. Take the Arab period around 870 to 1091. You're sitting under an olive tree while a scholar from Tunisia, let's call him Idris, teaches a local boy how to write in Kufic script. Idris also brings Arabic numerals, herbal medicine, astronomy, and new irrigation techniques. One fringe detail: Maltese historians believe the Arabic influence on the Maltese language is so foundational that modern Maltese grammar is closer to Tunisian Arabic than Italian, even though 90% of the vocabulary today sounds like Italian. Go figure. This makes the Maltese language itself a walking, talking intellectual artifact, centuries of philosophical evolution baked into syntax and idioms. A single Maltese sentence can carry echoes of Plato, the Quran, Cicero, and the Pope all at once. Talk about cognitive flexibility. Historians still argue whether the Arab period preserved or suppressed earlier Maltese cultural layers, but there's no denying that it seeded new systems of knowledge that never fully left. Fast forward again, this time to the 18th century. You're inside a library in Valletta that smells like parchment and pipe smoke. This is the Enlightenment era, and despite being technically under the control of the Knights, Malta becomes a small but potent intellectual hub. Scientists, theologians, and amateur philosophers use it as a layover, and often as a quiet space to think and write. One standout is Mikhail Anton Vasali, a rebellious genius, sometimes called the father of the Maltese language. He's jailed, exiled, and praised all in the span of one lifetime. You flip through one of his manuscripts, written in Maltese, of course, and realize he's not just trying to standardize a dialect. He's building an identity. The quirky tidbit: Vasali once proposed that Malta become a neutral academic state like Geneva, with universities and research centers instead of armies. The Knights didn't love that, but the dream lives on. Today, Malta has turned parts of that dream into policy. You visit the University of Malta, founded in 1592, and meet students studying AI, theology, classics, and marine biology, sometimes all in the same week. One PhD candidate tells you she's writing her dissertation on medieval Maltese medical texts that quote both Galen and North African herbalists. You try to look impressed while Googling Galen under the table. And it's not just the academics. You visit a local theater in Floriana that's running a mashup of Shakespeare's Tempest set on a post-apocalyptic gozo. The lead character? A storm-battered Prospero muttering in Maltese and wearing Air Jordans. It's absurd. It's brilliant. And it somehow works. That's Malta again, layered, ironic, and fearless with fusion. In fact, Maltese folktales often involve clever characters who outwit stronger forces. You hear one about a village idiot who tricks a pirate captain by pretending the well is poisoned. Another tells of a priest who outpreaches the devil himself. Even the landscape is part of the story. Hills that look like sleeping giants, caves said to be portals. Stones that must not be moved, lest curses follow. One local tells you, our stories are survival manuals with jokes. That tracks. You also notice how many Maltese people write poetry. Not for school, just for life. You meet an old man who recites verses about sea foam and dying cats with the same grave reverence. It's weirdly touching. Art, language, ritual, none of it feels ornamental here. It's armor. It's memory. It's resistance, too. During colonial rule, multiple occupiers tried to suppress the Maltese language in favor of Italian or English. Yet somehow, the language survived, not through decrees, but through lullabies, street banter, and rude jokes whispered in church pews. And that quiet resistance shaped identity just as much as any law or battle. One professor you meet sums it up. Malta never had the luxury of forgetting who you wake to soft bells chiming in the distance. Not the eerie kind, just the gentle, echoing call from some hilltop church doing its morning ritual. You're standing in a sun-drenched courtyard in Dinah, the silent city. The limestone walls are golden, the streets are empty, and if you squint, it could be any century. But as you start walking, something strange happens. The past and present blur. The footsteps echo like monks, but the nearby cafe smells suspiciously like espresso and wireless routers. A teenage barista waves at you while typing on her tablet. Welcome to Malta's eternal balancing act. Heritage meets hustle. Today, you're tracking Malta's more subtle, ongoing influence, the kind that doesn't always make headlines, but shapes the systems we live in: language, religion, and global governance. Don't roll your eyes. Yes, this is the serious stuff. But trust me, it's more interesting than it sounds. Especially when told by a sunburned island with 3 official holidays for military defeats. Start with language. Modern Maltese is the only Semitic language written in Latin script. That's already wild. But what's wilder? It's a language that absorbs foreign words like a sponge on espresso. Italian, French, Arabic, English, they're all in there, stirred together like a weird linguistic milkshake. Mainstream fact: in 2004, Maltese became one of the official languages of the European Union. You remember that dusty lecture hall in Brussels where interpreters scrambled to add a new channel for a language only 500,000 people speak fluently? Someone panicked. Someone probably cried. But Malta showed up anyway, fully formed, fully fluent, and ready to argue about fisheries policy in a language older than many EU members. And the quirky bit? Maltese curse words are so creatively euphemistic, they've spawned entire studies in linguistic blasphemy. One popular phrase literally translates to kiss the donkey of the saint. And no, I will not explain that. But Malta's linguistic uniqueness goes deeper than novelty. It challenges how we define European. Here's a nation that's both deeply Catholic and deeply Semitic, whose vowels sing like Sicily, but whose sentence structure leans toward North Africa. That duality forces bigger institutions, like the EU, to stretch their definitions, make space, adapt. Sound familiar? Now let's talk religion. You already know the whole St. Paul shipwreck situation. But did you know Malta has one of the highest church-to-person ratios in the world? It's practically a spiritual vending machine. One local joke goes, you trip over a rock, you land in a basilica. You stroll through Mosta now, staring up at the iconic dome. The third largest unsupported dome in Europe, by the way. It's a Sunday, so the place is packed. You slip into a pew between a toddler chewing on a rosary and a grandma praying like she's negotiating a ceasefire. But faith here isn't just tradition. It's architecture, diplomacy, identity. Malta has hosted countless interfaith dialogues, Vatican delegations, and spiritual summits. And despite being one of the most Catholic nations per capita, it legalized divorce in 2011 and same-sex marriage in 2017. Historians still argue whether these shifts mark a modern moral pivot or just Malta doing what it always does, absorbing change without losing its roots. Either way, the island quietly influences global religious discussions. Not bad for a place where goats still outnumber taxis in some villages. On to politics. Yes, it's a yawn sometimes, but Malta punches well above its weight here too. First, its neutrality. Enshrined in the Constitution since 1987, Malta isn't just not in NATO, it's legally bound to stay out of military alliances. This makes it an ideal host for diplomatic summits, peace talks, and slightly awkward we're not officially meetings between rival nations. In fact, the quirky fringe fact? The Cold War essentially ended here. Kind of. In December 1989, George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev met on a ship off Malta's coast for what's now called the Malta Summit. It wasn't flashy. There were no treaty signings. But both leaders declared the Cold War over. The weather was so bad, the press called it the C6 Summit. Still, history happened here, in Maltese waters, no less. More recently, Malta has held key EU roles despite its size. It held the EU presidency in 2017 and hosted digital policy summits that influenced Europe's approach to data protection, AI ethics, and internet governance. Not bad for a country where half the roads still have chickens crossing unironically. You visit a government office now, a surprisingly sleek building with solar panels and motion sensors. Inside, a junior diplomat tells you Malta's small size is actually its superpower. Well, like a whisper in a room full of shouters. People stop and lean in. That whisper matters. When Malta advocates for Mediterranean refugee protections, it doesn't carry the weight of superpower, but it carries moral weight. When it mediates between Libya and Europe or pushes for sustainable maritime, you stretch your legs and crack your neck. Metaphorically, of course. Because right now, you're not in your bed, or on a plane, or even walking real streets. You're in the long, slow drift of time again, and Malta is still beneath your feet. But this time, you're standing not in the past, but in the tight coil of the present, where Malta, this sun-soaked sliver of limestone, isn't just remembering its history, it's repurposing it. Let's talk soft power. The kind you can't see on a battlefield, but feel on your screen in your passport. In a UN resolution that politely, but firmly, uses Malta as an example of regional best practices. Yeah, that kind of power. Start with diplomacy. Malta is one of the smallest members of the United Nations. And yet, it's not just a quiet participant. It's a prodigious voice in maritime law, cultural heritage protection, and surprise twist, outer space law. Yep, the island that's barely the size of a Manhattan borough helps shape the rules for stuff literally orbiting Earth. Mainstream historical fact. In 1982, Malta played a leading role in pushing the United Nations to adopt the Convention on the Law of the Sea. A Maltese diplomat named Arvid Pardo, in fact, was the guy who stood up in the UN and declared the oceans the common heritage of mankind. Fancy phrase, massive implications. Without Malta's nudge, we'd still be squabbling over deep-sea mining rights like raccoons over a discarded burrito. The quirky tidbit, Malta once proposed that ancient sunken artifacts in international waters should be protected from treasure hunters by international law. Not only did the UN like the idea, they made it policy. So somewhere, there's a would-be pirate scowling at a Maltese clause in a UN treaty while twirling his snorkel. But soft power isn't just about lawmaking, it's about identity. Malta has transformed its centuries of occupation and adaptation into a unique brand. A brand that's part fortress, part festival. Ever heard of Valletta 2018? That's the year Malta's capital was crowned European Capital of Culture. That meant art installations in ancient cisterns, digital light shows across fortresses, and performances staged where knights once swore oaths. Thousands flocked in. Budget airlines made a killing. A record number of locals forgot where they parked. Still, behind the pageantry was a very clever signal. Malta was showing Europe it could blend old and new, seriousness and spectacle. It wasn't begging to be seen, it was inviting people to notice. And they did. Tourism, of course, exploded. But not just the selfie stick variety. Cultural tourism surged. People came to see Neolithic temples older than Stonehenge, and stayed for rooftop jazz festivals under Baroque domes. Historians still argue whether this commodification of history dilutes the deeper narratives, or simply makes them accessible to more people. Does turning a medieval street into a movie set honor the past, or commercialize it? That debate's ongoing, but Malta isn't waiting for a verdict. It's already filming the sequel. Speaking of movies, let's not ignore how Malta parlayed its weather and architecture into a mini Hollywood. Films like Gladiator, Troy, Assassin's Creed, and even Game of Thrones used Maltese settings. Valletta's walls, the Blue Lagoon, the Gozo Cliffs, to stand in for ancient Rome, mythical Greece, or Westeros. Malta became a cinematic chameleon. The fringe fact? Malta once blew up its own film set, an ancient temple built for Agora, because the demolition was cheaper than paying for storage. Environmentalists were not amused. Local goats were reportedly unfazed. Beyond cinema, Malta's exporting another valuable product: education. Yep, students from North Africa, the Middle East, and even Asia flock here to study medicine, law, and language. English is one of the official tongues, after all, and tuition is far more affordable than in the UK or US. Malta becomes a launch pad, one that's warmer, friendlier, and rarely covered in snow. You pass through University Courtyard now. Students sip Sisk beer, laptops glowing under old arches. They're joking in 3 languages at once. Some are future doctors, some are future diplomats, and some are just here to escape the chaos back home. That's another subtle impact. Malta as sanctuary. From World War II to the Libyan Civil War, this island has repeatedly offered safe harbor. Refugees have arrived by boat, seeking respite. Journalists in exile have typed in cafes. Activists have found quiet apartments in which to regroup. Malta's not perfect. Its asylum system is often overwhelmed, but its history of shelter is undeniable. Historians still discuss whether this pattern is a deliberate state policy or just a geographical accident paired with a national ethos. But whatever the route, the result is clear. Malta doesn't just remember its role as refuge, it lives it. One final thread you trace is technology. Yes, really. In the late 2010s, Malta tried to rebrand itself. It's dark now. Quiet. You're standing on the bastions of Valletta again. This time, alone, wind brushing past like a sleepy sigh. Below you, the harbor lights glimmer like scattered coins. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of drums, cannon fire, and centuries of languages colliding like clashing waves. But those are just ghosts. The kind Malta keeps politely tucked behind its tourism brochures. Tonight, you're tracing not just Malta's footsteps across history, but the lasting fingerprints it's left behind. The subtle but unshakable ways this tiny island has shaped and keeps shaping global systems, cultures, and identities. Let's start with a bold one: law. Remember how Malta led the charge on the UN Law of the Sea? Well, its appetite for justice didn't stop there. In 2002, Malta proposed another deceptively simple idea. What if there was a court to try the world's worst crimes? Genocide, crimes, crimes against humanity. That seed grew into the International Criminal Court. Mainstream historical fact. The Rome Statute, which founded the ICC, was heavily shaped by Maltese legal experts. Malta became one of the first nations to ratify it, and its judges have since served in various international tribunals. You're not surprised. Malta has been mediating disputes since long before Zoom diplomacy existed. And the quirky twist? Malta's own ancient legal system still has bizarre leftovers from colonial eras. For example, technically, it's illegal to carry a corpse in a taxi, which raises more questions than it answers. But beneath the legalese is something deeper, Malta's sense of guardianship. Whether over underwater ruins, ancient manuscripts, or shared human dignity, this island keeps volunteering to hold the line. Quietly, firmly. Now zoom out, way out, across borders, continents, hemispheres. Because guess what? Malta's fingerprints aren't just on legal systems. They're on language, music, architecture, cuisine. You may not see Made in Malta stamped on it, but the cultural echoes ripple far. Let's play a game. You walk into a random home in southern Italy, Egypt, Tunisia, or even parts of the Balkans. On the stove, stewed rabbit, spiced tomato sauces, fennel, olive oil like liquid gold. One bite, and you realize you're tasting a flavor palette that's suspiciously Maltese. The island's cuisine is a memory map of every empire that ever camped here and then got absorbed. French winemaking techniques, Spanish saffron, Sicilian desserts, North African spices, British tea. It's not just food, it's diplomacy, edible and fragrant. Even Maltese folk music carries Arab Andalusian rhythms, sometimes performed with instruments that wouldn't be out of place in a Moroccan riad. And if you've ever heard Anna, Maltese improvised singing, you know it's one part poetry duel, one part Mediterranean therapy session. Historians still argue whether Malta exported this style to Sicily or adopted it from North Africa. But either way, the island's culture spreads not through conquest, but through contagion, the good kind. Next up, architecture. You duck into a shadowy alleyway and look up. Limestone balconies lean out like old grandmothers watching their stories unfold. The wood is faded sea green, the corners hand-carved, the window panes glowing faintly. This is the Maltese Galleria, and once you've seen one, you start noticing them elsewhere. In Tripoli, in Palermo, even in certain Spanish port cities. They're not just functional, they're Malta's quiet claim on the skyline. Now, think about how this kind of visibility, this soft export of identity, becomes influence. When nations look to revitalize historic districts or restore old coastal forts, they often study how Malta did it, how to preserve authenticity without turning it into a wax museum. You wander through Medina again, the former capital, now a city museum hybrid. Cobblestones underfoot, silence in the air. Even the cats seem to whisper here. And yet, the Wi-Fi's excellent. That's Malta's magic trick, preserving the illusion of ancient slowness while running on digital caffeine. The fringe fact? Medina has been featured in so many fantasy films and historical dramas that locals sometimes forget what century the sets are supposed to be from. During one shoot, a crew apparently mistook a real shrine for a prop and tried to age it with paint. The church was not thrilled, but what you really feel in places like this is legacy, the weight of it, the defiant pride of a country that has been shaped, scarred, rebuilt, and now refined. Because legacy isn't just about the past, it's about what continues. Which brings you to Malta's role in the digital age. Yes, we're back in that strange terrain where history meets hashtags. But Malta's ahead of you. You breathe in deeply. Salt air, faint citrus, and maybe a trace of history clinging to the back of your throat. Or that could be the ricotta you inhaled earlier. Either way, you're still here. Still wandering the winding spine of an island that refuses to fade. And now, you begin to realize this isn't just about Malta anymore. This is about what it represents. About the idea that size, visibility, and fame are not the sole ingredients for impact. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones that sit in the shadow of giants and teach them how to walk with grace. Take a good look at the modern world. diplomacy, defense alliances, commerce, migration, technology, tourism, global culture. Each thread, in some small way, traces back to this island. Even when Malta isn't in the headlines, it's often pulling on the cords behind them. Let's talk religion. Again, because while Malta's role in the Christian world is already etched into its fortresses and feast days, its religious influence today is more complex and a little ironic. It's not just a Catholic stronghold anymore. It's also a broker of religious dialogue. Mainstream historical fact. In 2011, Malta hosted the first ever interfaith climate dialogue between leaders from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Right there, on this sun-drenched pebble in the sea. Faiths that had clashed for centuries met to talk about melting glaciers. A Maltese archbishop opened the session by referencing the book of Genesis and the Quran. Everyone nodded awkwardly, but it worked. That's Malta. Ancient roots, modern problems, and a willingness to play referee. And the quirky twist? Every August, there's a festival in Malta where religious statues are paraded through towns with fireworks so aggressive they once knocked a guy's toupee clean off. He laughed. The statue didn't. Local lore now considers that wig blessed. You pass a quiet chapel tucked between two apartment blocks. Its door is open. A single candle flickers. No service, no priest, just space. That's another Maltese legacy, providing room for reflection, even in the tightest corners. Then there's language. Maltese is the only Semitic language officially written in Latin script. It's got the syntax of Arabic, vocabulary from Italian, and the rhythm of a seaside lullaby. Imagine speaking like a 13th century Sicilian sailor who once studied poetry in Cairo. And you're getting close. It's more than quirky. It's linguistic resilience. Every attempt to overwrite the language failed. And now it's on Google Translate, Duolingo, and even street signs that make tourists squint and locals smirk. Historians still debate whether Maltese evolved naturally from Siculo-Arabic or if it was engineered over centuries into a kind of cultural camouflage. Either way, it's proof of how an island can protect its voice, even when everyone's yelling over it. Zoom out again, and you find Malta cropping up in the most unexpected places. Like the EU. In 2004, Malta joined the European Union. Everyone expected it to be a quiet participant. But within a few years, it was chairing migration committees, pushing for Mediterranean development funds, and proposing tax harmonization policies that made a few larger nations squirm. It's the kid in class who shows up late, sits at the back, and then nails the group project with one PowerPoint slide. Cool, calm, effective. And no, it's not always smooth. Malta has had its share of controversy. Questions around press freedom, golden passport schemes, and political corruption have sparked international scrutiny. But here's what's remarkable. The Maltese public shows up. They protest, vote, argue, organize. They don't let their island be handled without their hands on the wheel. You see, for every ancient ruin and golden dome, Malta's real legacy may be this. Its people. Stubborn, charming, slightly chaotic, fiercely proud. They remember everything. Every siege, every betrayal, every festival where it rained too early and ruined the confetti. They remember, and they retell, and they resist being flattened into one version of themselves. And that memory, more than stone or steel, is what holds Malta up. The stories, the grit, the slightly too loud cousin who will absolutely correct you if you mispronounce Caghak. Even Malta's diaspora carries this weight. From Melbourne to Michigan, London to Libya, there are people with a Maltese grandfather and a memory of lamb cookie pie. They send money home. They speak Maltese badly to their kids. And every time someone says, "Wait, where is Malta again?" they smile with the weariness of ambassadors. Because you're standing on a ferry again, the low engine hum matching your heartbeat, the wake unfurling behind like a timeline you've walked from beginning to end. Malta glows faintly in the night mist. Golden domes, scattered lights, church spires. And somehow, it feels bigger than it did when you first arrived. Not physically, cosmically. You get it now. You really do. This tiny rock, What some empires once dismissed as a pit stop has quietly, persistently, and profoundly shaped the world you live in. And it's not done yet. Let's talk money. Not in the hidden treasure chest way, though, with Malta, that wouldn't be surprising, but in the modern economic sense. Because yes, Malta has found ways to punch far above its fiscal weight. Mainstream historical fact: Malta's economic pivot in the early 2000s from manufacturing to services wasn't just strategic, it was visionary. By investing in sectors like iGaming, maritime logistics, and medical tourism, Malta became a hub for European entrepreneurs. Add to that its bilingual workforce, Eurozone membership, and sun-drenched lifestyle. And suddenly you've got a hotspot for startups and offshore banking. And yet, there's still a village somewhere where an old lady refuses to pay more than 30 cents for bread. That's Malta in a nutshell. Of course, there are open debates about ethics in certain economic sectors, golden visa schemes, low tax rates that irk EU partners, and rapid development that sometimes forgets the value of silence. Historians and economists still argue whether Malta's blend of open-door business and tight-knit community can last without fraying. But here's where you pause and take a look at the other thread: environmental legacy. In recent years, Malta has thrown itself into marine conservation. It helped shape EU fisheries policy and expanded marine protected areas, all while balancing local fishing traditions that go back to Phoenician times. Fringe fact: there's an ongoing debate about whether an ancient underwater structure off Gozo is just a rock formation or a Neolithic temple complex. If proven, it would predate even the pyramids. For now, it's just another mystery waiting under the surf. But Malta's commitment to the sea isn't about archaeology, it's about survival. Rising sea levels, water scarcity, and heat waves threaten the island just as they do others. And still, Malta pushes for green infrastructure, urban gardens, and tech-driven water recycling. All while locals grumble good-naturedly about the heat, but never quite give up wearing long sleeves. There's this saying on the island, "Ayel Bahar, Jadi Ujio." The sea gives and takes. And it's true. The sea has been Malta's highway, its shield, its stage, and its judge. Every wave that breaks against its shore carries a little bit of history and a little bit of tomorrow. Now, look at the bigger map. This island has never led an empire, but it has outlasted them. It's never launched a crusade, but it has hosted them. It's never claimed greatness, only relevance. And somehow, that has been enough to echo through the ages. Malta's story is a reminder that legacy doesn't require landmass. That size and importance are not synonyms. That history is not always made by the loudest or the largest, but by those who persist, who observe, who survive. So the next time someone tells you history belongs to the giants, point to this speck in the sea. Remind them that this tiny island stood between empires and stopped them both, protected knowledge when others burned it, shaped faith, war, law, and culture without ever holding a continent, was so strategically vital that every major power wanted it, and every local just wanted lunch in peace. And most of all, remind them that Malta's story is still unfolding, not as a relic, not as a theme park, but as a living place, a crossroads, a keeper of fire. You close your eyes, you hear waves, church bells, laughter from a distant rooftop party, maybe a goat, of course a goat. The world spins on, unaware that one of its smallest islands still helps steer it. Now let all slow down. The ships are docked, the market's closed. The limestone streets quiet beneath the warm hush of midnight. You're still on the island, but softer now. You feel the history exhale. Not gone, just resting. Let the sounds blur. Seagulls replaced by your breath. Footsteps replaced by your heartbeat. The harbor is still there, still breathing in rhythm with the sea. But now it fades gently into the dark like a lullaby you've always known. Malta isn't a dream. It's proof that something small can echo across centuries. That a speck on a map can shape the stars that guide ships and stories alike. So as you lie back, wherever you are, whatever time it is, Let that thought settle into your chest like warm sun on a stone wall. You don't have to be large to matter. You don't have to be loud to change the world. You just have to be steady, curious, unshakable. Let the waters still. Let the stories drift. Let your breath slow, soft, and even. The island is quiet now. The world keeps turning. And you've made the journey. You've seen what most people overlook. And now, you rest, not just informed, but transformed. Tomorrow can wait. Good night.